I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is our nerdiest thing.
This season, we are discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses and all of Sarah J. Maas's books. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Hello, hello, and welcome to a very spooky Our Nerdiest Thing. We are going to be talking about chapters 8, 9, and 10 of A Court of Thorns and Roses. But before we really get into it, we're going to hear from Mindy for our nerdiest vocabulary.
Can you please tell me how to pronounce spooky?
Spooky.
I think you did it just fine. Do you want to know how to spell it? Because it's Spoooooky.
That's not how I would spell it, but that's fine.
So, in keeping with our theme this week of things that go bump in the night, our nerdiest vocabulary is the lesser fairy that we see in this chapter. And I know Whitney pronounces it bog.
And that is correct, right?
I always called it a boggy.
I called it a bogey, which bothered me because it sounds like a booger.
And spoiler alert, you're right.
No, I don't want it to be a bogey.
It is bogey. According to the Court of Thorns and Roses wiki.
I was hoping it was going to be bougie.
Oh, this bougie was whispering in my ear.
When it becomes real, it's got like a tiara on.
Girl, let me tell you. Just look at me. Look at me with my Prosecco.
Bogey?
It is bogey.
I'm going to keep calling it bog.
We're all going to call it different things.
Yeah. Well, let's do a summary. So, Deb, can you pull a name out of our nerdiest hat?
If I get picked again, I'm cutting someone.
That would be 4 times in a row that I would miss it. I'll get the timer ready.
All right, Whitney or Mindy. My friends look like I struggle. But I guess I look like them too. It's Mindy. All right, Whitney's going to start our timer.
Make me do it next time.
I don't like that. It's not fair.
Oh, that's funny. All
right,
are you ready?
Start the timer. All right. I'm so not prepared for this.
Set. Go.
Okay, when we start out, Farah's in the garden and she hears something, but it's invisible and it's kind of creepy and weird. And then she decides she wants to have Lucian as an ally, so she's going to get together with him. And Tamlin asks to take her for a tour, and she says, no, I want to be by myself. And then she promptly goes on a hunt with Lucian. While they're out, he basically tells her he totally knew what she was going to do and that it's not going to help. And oh shit. And then they run into this bogey and fuck.
Are you saying fuck because it's bogey and not bogger?
That sucked balls.
I thought you did a good job,
That sucked a big
honestly.
bogey.
There was kind of a lot that happened in this section, so it's hard to narrow
Enough
it down.
to talk about for 45 minutes to an hour?
Oh, 100%. Most deaf.
The rapper or like your dream? Or...
No, that's the kind of thing that I used to say like when I thought that it made me sound cool. And
That's
now
something
it's
that
just
a bougie would say.
A
Most
bougie,
deaf
yeah.
girl. Most deaf.
Well, I'm going to get into some foreshadowing in these chapters because then that'll kind of give us a nice little like overview of some of the things that happened in this section. So this section is a lot of foreshadowing, and I'm sure that this is not everything that happened that is foreshadowing of something else. But it's just the big things that I really noticed. So at one point in this section, Alice tells Feyre that Lucian needs somebody who will snap at him. He could do with a bit of someone snapping at him. And I just thought that was interesting that maybe that is some foreshadowing to the potentially poor pairing of Lucian and his mate Elaine, because she's definitely not somebody who's going to snap at him, at least as far as we've seen
She's not
so
someone
far.
that says anything.
Right. She's just kind of like, she's kind of very passive, right? So I just thought that was interesting. Like, he needs somebody to snap at him, and he seems to not be a super great match so far with Elaine. So maybe that has something to do with it. This may or may not be foreshadowing because I forgot to go back and double check if I was remembering this correctly. But Feyre keeps talking about Tamlin's baldric of knives. Don't we find out later that those are like Illyrian knives from when Rhys taught Tamlin some Illyrian fighting techniques.
We'll let everyone know next episode.
I know. I
Do you know,
forgot to
Mindy?
look that up.
Keep reading, Whitney.
We have not told that story yet, so maybe during our Nerdiest thing, we can tell you that story later.
Yeah. Just keep reading. Feyre talks about her, she calls it her wild, small dream of wanting to have her sisters married off so she doesn't have to worry about taking care of them anymore and have the time to just paint, to be like financially comfortable enough that she doesn't have to do anything but paint. And I thought that that was some good foreshadowing, first of all, of how important painting is to her, but also her future as High Lady helping kids heal with art. Like she does become comfortable enough and safe enough to just spend her days painting, but it's not just painting for herself, which I thought was interesting. Feyre rejects Tamlin's company in favor of Lucien. Tamlin offers to give her a tour of his grounds, and she's like, yeah, no, thank you, because she's trying to find Lucien to basically get him on her side so that he'll convince Tamlin to let her go back home and take care of her family. But that rejecting Tamlin in favor of Lucien, I think, foreshadows Tamlin's jealousy that we see a lot in Mist and Fury and in Wings and Ruin, where Tamlin is very jealous of Lucien's friendship with Feyre and often feels like Lucien is like overstepping his bounds with Feyre. And I also wrote down that's a foreshadowing of their future mess around in Wings and Ruin. Feyre and Lucien, like, they're kind of working together, but not really.
Isn't there a song about a mess around?
Probably. I was thinking New Girl, the Winston CC mess arounds.
Oh, yeah. The mess arounds.
That's what I was thinking of.
I just watched that episode.
Oh, man. Feyre at one point wonders if Lucien's eye, his like not glamored eye, but his I guess a magic eye,
Gilded.
The gilded, yeah, thank you. That's a better way to describe it. If it could see through the back of his head, if he could see in the back of his head, which I was like, I mean, probably, because in Wings and Ruin, when Lucien comes to the night court and he's talking to Rhys, I think, about his eye, he says, like, I can see things that other people can't. I can see through spells. I can see through glamours and stuff like that. So I wondered if he actually can see in the back of his head.
Is that even more foreshadowing, though? Because Elaine is supposed to be a seer. She also sees things that other people can't see.
Good point.
Oh, look at that.
You guys, I just came up with that on my own.
Well, and I was just thinking, too, like, he can see through glamours or whatever. Like, that may not be the eye. That might be his parentage, right?
What if Elaine's his sister?
Ew. Gross.
In this chapter, though, doesn't he tell Feyre that he doesn't have any special talents?
I don't remember.
But if he can see things that other people can't, that is a pretty special talent.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, maybe it's because of the eye and not because of his Fae heritage, which I actually do go into in my later deep
maybe
dive.
he just keeps it to himself, because we don't hear about anything that his eye can or cannot do until book 3.
Also, why would he divulge in telling her that he had any kind of special power? He wants to kill her.
Right, at this point, 100%, yeah. He doesn't trust her at all. When Feyre realizes that Tamlin is not planning on sending her home and that she's going to have to stay in Spring Court, she thinks to herself, I couldn't just stay here forever until I die. And that, I think, is foreshadowing her imprisonment and her despair when Tamlin locks her in the house in book 2 in Mist and Fury. We have the first mention of a High Lady in these chapters, where Feyre is wondering, she knows that there's a her connected to this blight, and she's wondering if that her that Lucien seems so afraid of is a High Lady, and if there even is such a thing, which obviously is foreshadowing Feyre's future as the first and only High Lady at the Night Court. Lucien threatens Feyre when she's asking about the Suriel and says, if you are curious about this, I can have Tamlin put you on house arrest, which Tamlin absolutely does put her on house arrest.
For her own safety, might I add.
Right, which is exactly the kind of thing that Lucien's talking about, right? Like, if you're going to do something dangerous and what I think is dangerous and stupid, I'm going to make you be locked in the house so you can't go do what I think is dangerous.
What a son of a bitch.
What I think is interesting about that, too, is that isn't he the one later on that, like, tricks her into going to the Suriel, and then he, like, totally, like, he bails on her?
Well, in this chapter, is where he tells her how to do it, isn't it? When they're talking about it?
I think kind of, but I think Mindy's point is that later he kind of convinces her to use the cereal.
That's true. He definitely does not tell her how dangerous it actually would be. Yeah. She was not making an informed decision there. Feyre, when she is being attacked by the bog.
It's a bogey.
The bogey. Her pleasant thought, or one of her pleasant thoughts, is of a beautiful night sky, which is foreshadowing her time at the night court, her mate, and her true home. And then the last one that I wrote down is she wants to come through on her promise of taking care of her family. And Tamlin tells her basically, like, I'm taking care of them. I wasn't going to just take you and let them starve to death. I'm not a monster. But Feyre is thinking that's not the same thing as fulfilling my promise to my mom that I would take care of them, which is her motivation to try to leave. But I think that that's foreshadowing how she eventually does take care of her family herself once Elaine and Nesta are in the night court.
Well, and I've always wondered too, I'm like, she doesn't really have a choice because she is figuring out very quickly it's going to be hard to escape. But like, for me, I would have been like, well, I don't know that you're taking care of them. How do I know that you didn't still send someone back to kill them? How do I know that, you don't have another Fae standing outside the house that's going to cause them harm if they come after me? Like, I've always wondered that. But I guess if you don't have a choice, you just have to hope that that's going to be the best.
Well, and at this point, too, I think Feyre still thinks that they can't lie to her.
That's right. She says it again.
Yeah. So she thinks, well, if he says that he's taking care of them, he can't lie. So he has to be taking care of them.
Well, and then we find out later, do we find out later in this chapter? Does he tell her that this chapter? Or I wrote that note somewhere. Anyway, we find out later that he does tell her that that's not
true.
Yeah.
I was actually just going to say I'm really disappointed by the amount of frosting you guys still have in your glass. I only have like one lick left. I'll tell everyone what our Nerdiest cocktail is here at the end, but it was posted on Instagram before this episode came out. But yeah, you guys have a lot of frosting left, and I feel gross, but probably more fulfilled than you do.
That's funny.
I want to tack onto that last thing you said too, though, because I wrote in my notes the same thing that she said. Tamlin's family is not the same. Tamlin's taking care of my family is not the same as my looking after them. And like I wrote in my notes, Feyre is still clinging to her promise to her mother. And as many times as I've read this, I still wonder when she lets that go. Like, now I'm going to be looking out for that moment when she finally lets that whole thing go. And like you said, maybe it is when she finally realizes that she is taking care of her family.
I think a big thing is later in this book when she realizes they are cared for and they have everything that they'll need. And like, her dad has started to recover and has, went to go meet some trade ships. And I think then she's like, okay, so maybe an underlying part of that is she does wonder if he could lie to her, which, as we talked about last episode, these fairies can very well lie.
I think we're going to see, this is how I remember it, but we'll see, as we keep reading. I think it's when when Tamlin sends her away and she goes back home, she sees firsthand that he did take care of them. But then she gets a little bit of closure when Nesta tells her that she went to the wall to like try to find her. And then when Feyre decides to leave to go rescue Tamlin and all the Spring Court, she thinks that she's going on like a suicide mission. So I think that when she leaves Nesta and Elaine to go under the mountain, she's kind of letting go of that responsibility of taking care of them because she thinks she's going to die.
That makes sense.
What I mean?
Yeah.
And so then when she doesn't die, she gets turned to Fae anyway and is trying to stay away from her family to leave them out of Fae business to protect them,
Yeah.
But I did just see one other thing that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about. So at one point, Lucien basically calls Feyre out on like, I know you're trying to befriend me because you want me to tell Tamlin to let you go. Like, I know that that's what you're doing. And he says, I'm flattered that you think I have that kind of sway with Tamlin. And I wrote down, why don't you?
Because Tamlin's a dick.
Right? But I mean, he's his emissary. He's obviously his right-hand man. And we see later in book 2, and also in book 3, but especially in book 2, Lucian does not have sway with Tamlin the way that he really should, as somebody who's been so loyal and a good friend and is a good person that makes pretty good decisions. He's not dumb. He's very skilled.
But Tamlin does not like being told that he's wrong about anything. So if you let anyone have sway with him, then they could have an opinion, right? Like, we all know that, unfortunately, Lucian does not say anything whenever Tamlin decides to lock Feyre in the house, which is, for her, a big hit to their friendship. But I mean, maybe Lucian knew. He's like, it's not going to do anything anyway. And we were talking about last time how we kind of hope, well, I don't hope, some people hope that Tamlin has a redemption arc, and so maybe that's one of the things where Lucian does go to him and is like, dude, what are you doing?
Right.
And I mean, he's not going to listen to anybody.
Right. He does listen to Ianthe, though.
Yeah, I think they were fucking.
Because she has boobs.
She has big boobs, apparently.
I don't remember that part, but
the other thing, what you were just talking about, Mindy, that reminded me something I was thinking about. When Feyre is talking so much about making that promise to her mom and trying to figure out how she can go take care of her family, I thought, Feyre is really holding on to this purpose in her life. Like, that is what's keeping her from losing her mind. That's what's keeping her from completely freaking out, being in Prythian, like focusing on this purpose of, I'm supposed to fulfill this promise. I'm supposed to take care of my family. And I thought that is so much like Nesta. When we see in book 3, when Nesta has been, turned into a fae and is really kind of like flailing around trying to figure out, like, what do I do with my life now that I'm not a human anymore? And Feyre at one point in book 3 is basically like, oh, she needs a purpose. She needs a purpose to hold on to. And Rhys, that's the same time that Rhys offers her the job in the Night Court of being the emissary to the human lands. And she does really, really well. Like, Nesta does really well with that when she has that purpose. So that was just one more thing that I noticed that was like, these two sisters are very much alike, and they deal with stress in a very similar way. So why do we hate on Nesta so much when Feyre does a lot of the same things? Anyway, I love Nesta. We all know it. So, Mindy, I know you did a lot of research this week about lesser fae.
Like the bogey. I did. I was very interested to see, because Feyre and Lucian have a conversation about the kind of qualities that some of the fae have. So I kind of wanted to look into it sort of from the book perspective and from a folklore perspective, the difference between lesser fairies and high fae. And I found a lot of very interesting things. So sometimes in old folklore, they're called fair folk or wee folk, which I thought was interesting. This was really, really interesting to me. One story described that there was a group of angels that were revolting, and God ordered the gates of heaven shut. And then those that were still in heaven remained angels. Those in hell became demons, and those caught in between became fairies.
So couldn't that tie a little bit into Crescent City?
Yes.
And my theories around the timeline of all of this?
Yeah. I thought that was very, very interesting. Another thing I found was that sometimes they blamed tuberculosis on fairies. Basically, they said they forced young men and women to dance at revels every night and caused them to waste away from lack of rest.
Oh, my God.
That's how I feel after I go dancing.
Right? Some fairies were little more than tricksters, while others were more dangerous, like we see the bogey. And another interesting thing I found was that rowan trees were considered sacred to fairies and a charm tree to protect one's home. The interesting thing about that is the rowan tree is also called a mountain ash.
Ooh.
Okay.
I know, right? So much of the folklore talks about keeping fairies away with the use of iron or some sort of talisman or amulet. And I know we've gone into that. And this is where I wrote down, Lucian tells Feyre, and I don't think it was in this chapter. I think it's later on. He tells her that iron does not actually bother them at all, and that they can lie all they want, that they have circulated that rumor on the, so that the humans would think that they couldn't, that everything they say is the truth, even when they're lying. So he says, we did that on purpose.
That idea with the amulet we see at the beginning of Mist and Fury when Feyre is too scared basically to go into the prison. And so Amren gives her the necklace with the amulet and says that it'll protect her. And she doesn't question it at all. And then Amren's like, yeah, wasn't real. I just lied to you completely and you believed me for no reason at all.
She gave her the liquid luck, right?
Yes. It's like the placebo effect. Another thing I found was that wings, while common in Victorian and later artworks, are actually rare in folklore, which was interesting because, we see lots of wings in our Illyrian boys. But another thing that was brought up, that the fairies flew by means of magic, sometimes perched on the backs of birds or ragwort stems, which if you read The Cruel Prince, that's how they traveled in that book. So, which is also a very good series.
So good.
They also had the whole like humans can't stop dancing if they're dancing to the fairy music or whatever.
They can't lie.
They must have had tuberculosis.
That's true. And then they can't lie. Yeah.
Right.
They're always telling the truth.
Ashley Flowers, who does Crime Junkies, and she did a podcast called Supernatural, and she talks about like the dancing frenzy of Victoria time and how really it's more of like a psychological thing that people were doing that, but so many people blamed it on a spell, right? Because why would you just dance until you collapse, right? And a lot of it had to do with the power of like not wanting to be left out and the power of not wanting to be like, why'd you do that? You're insane, right? A lot of people won't speak up and say those things.
It almost makes me think of like middle school kids of, I would rather you think that I'm under a witch's spell than think I'm just a weirdo. You know what I mean? Like,
it's not just middle school kids, Whitney. I mean,
it starts in middle school and it stays
and
that
then
way.
Once you decide that you can do it, you just start a podcast about how weird you are and ask all those people to join you.
Exactly.
And then it totally becomes cool. Then I wanted to look into sort of how they were different from the High Fae. And one thing, and a lot of this, again, when I first read a book, I go through it, I'm looking for the story, I get into it, I probably skip over a ton of stuff. And now that I'm actually really looking at what I'm reading, I'm seeing so much more. So I guess I didn't realize that lesser fairies, they don't necessarily all have the arched ears. I always thought the all fae had that arched ear. But some, we know that some are described with scales, some have different colors. We've got the blue fairy that loses his wings, and there's green fairies and Valaris. They have long limbs. I think it was in the wiki that I read it, that high fae are different from the lesser fairies because they have human-looking appearances. So the lesser fairies are not, they don't look human at all. And sometimes, like even the blue fairy, I picture as like human, like, but painted blue. I don't know. So maybe he doesn't look very human. I don't know.
But isn't that whole, like, even the whole, like, any social structure of, like, the most beautiful people are always the people in, that have the highest ranking and have the most charisma.
It definitely plays into this hierarchy. And so the only thing that denotes the high fae as not being human is the arched ears and the long limbs. Any other difference besides that denotes a lesser fairy, which I thought was very interesting. Also, the lesser fairy obviously have weaker magic than the high fae, and they are considered disposable. And we see that when the Adriata, which one is that? Is that the Summer Court? The Summer Court gets attacked. They like move all the high fae into a room, and then they leave everybody else out there to like fend for themselves. So you sort of see that hierarchy where it's like, you're right, the beautiful people, we've got to save them, but all you other
I'm so sorry that I don't know this, and I know it even talked about it in these chapters, but if I have the question, I'm sure other people do too. So Tamlin's obviously high fae, and eventually Feyre becomes high fae. Is Lucian high fae or not?
I think he is, because he's the son of a high lord.
Being a lesser fairy is genetics.
I think it is.
Okay.
Because then later in Silver Flames, when we meet Gwen, she says, I think my father was high fae, but my mom was water nymph.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I do have to tell you guys that I had lunch with some friends today that I've gotten into these books, and one of them had not read Silver Flames because she didn't like Nesta.
Because she doesn't like Nesta.
And she sits down to lunch with me and she goes, okay. She's like, I don't love Nesta, but I understand Nesta. And then she goes, there's some passages that I think I'm going to tell my husband I want to read to him. I said, you right.
Spicy ones.
It's totally worth the read.
To your point, though, that was actually my next in my notes. It's when Lucian's talking to Feyre in this chapter, they're talking about she's asking like banal questions about the High Fae, I think, just to kind of get him to open up. He says, quote, "The High Fae don't have specific powers the way the lesser fairies do. I don't have a natural born affinity, if that's what you're asking. I don't clean everything in sight or lure mortals to a watery grave or grant you answers to whatever questions you might have if you trap me. We just exist to rule."
Can you imagine, though, if you were a High Fae and your magic power was to clean everything? I would be so upset. I'd be like, oh, that guy can turn into animals, but I'm going to like go do the dishes.
It's the short end of the stick.
Yeah,
sure.
it is.
Yeah.
Interesting you say that about turning into animals. Did you realize too, and I didn't realize this, it came out in this chapter, that Tamlin can not only shapeshift himself, he can shift other people?
Yeah, I never remembered that until I
didn't
read
either.
it.
Yeah, I don't think that I realized that he was turning other people.
Because he's the one that turned Andress.
I thought that it was like a spring court
Right. And so like
characteristic.
I do wonder if some point that's going to like loop back around in some way, because I felt like it was a weird thing to bring up, right? Because Andress could have just been someone that was able to do it.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I thought that was interesting too.
You know, while you're talking about this, the whole like lesser fae have weaker magic, but also like specific powers. I'm just thinking, do all the High Fae not have their powers because of Amarantha, or is it just the High Lords?
I felt like if none of them had it, they could have just killed her. Like if
See, that's
if
what I'm
they
thinking,
had
too.
their powers, they could have easily overtaken her.
Right.
And I guess it's a good illustration to show that they all give Feyre a drop of magic when she dies, but it's because Amarantha's already dead, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she is at that point. So with the lesser fairies, I'm just thinking through if their magic is weaker, they're all really afraid of these fairies in this first book, right? Like Lucian and Tamlin are very concerned about the lesser fairies. And I'm just wondering if in the background of this first book, which we don't really get to see this, but I'm wondering if some of the lesser fairies are like, finally my day has come, and they still have these powers and the High Fae don't. And so they're used to being the bottom of the hierarchy, and now they have this opportunity to use the little / weaker magic that they do have to kind of get revenge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I kind of wonder too if Amarantha doesn't like heighten that a little bit and like basically send them over there to cause trouble.
Well, yeah, because it would help destruct the courts in some way, because you have all of these fae that are resentful, right, that have always kind of been treated like shit, and all of a sudden their powers are heightened, and they're like, well, maybe I'll just go over there and mess you guys up a little bit.
Yeah, I think Amarantha absolutely sends them over, but I wonder, like you just said, I wonder if she makes their power stronger. She takes,
I mean, she could. It's her.
if she can take power,
her world. They're just
lessen
living in
power,
it.
she can give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? That's just, I hadn't really thought about it that way as far as social dynamics, but I bet that I just would imagine that would be in Sarah J's mind while she's writing this, right? Like in the background of the social dynamics.
That's got to be so hard as a writer, because, like, number one, you can't explain everything because it gets kind of boring and redundant. But then, like, there are things that a lot of nerds say is canon that, like, she's probably never going to explain, because as a writer, there are some things she may never want to pull out of her pocket in case she keeps going, right? She even said in a interview that maybe she's not done with Throne of Glass. Sorry, y'all. And I almost peed myself. I'm not going to lie.
I mean, you never want to show your whole hand.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. Because then everyone's going to, dissect it and do exactly what we're doing right this minute.
One last thing about the lesser fairies, and then I have an interesting story to share with everybody. The other thing that's mentioned is that there are some special fairies that we see, including the Demati, which is the ones that mind control, the shadow singers, like
Asriel.
thank you. God, I wanted to say Asterin.
No, she was just thinking wingspan.
I was.
Wingspan.
I couldn't get above the belt.
Can I ask a vocabulary question real quick?
Yes.
Is Damati really the way that you say it? Because that is not how I pronounce it in my head.
It is.
I did not know. That's just how I've
It is
always said
because
it.
that's a very common folklore term. The
Whoops.
Damati, like demons.
Okay. I've been saying that wrong in
When
my
we
head.
meet them, I'll do an
Yes.
official Our Nerdiest
Is it
vocabulary.
Damati or Shadow Singer?
Oh, no.
But yes, the shadow singers who control and hide in the shadows. They can hear and see things in the shadows. And then, of course, they're the seers, which are rare and can predict the future through visions. So those are just some special fairies that, you come across, and we will definitely meet more of those later on. But as I was digging through different folklore and things like that, I came across a Scottish ballad. And
as you do.
As everyone does when they're deep diving into lesser fairies.
When you say ballad, you're going to sing, right?
Absolutely not, because then we will have 0 listeners. But maybe Whitney will come up with that.
Whitney has something called a resting singing face that we all tease her about. She has the most beautiful voice on the planet when she sings, but
Thank you.
Her face, last episode, and I didn't say this, I had made this coconut drink, and Whitney tried it, and believe me, if her words don't say it, her face does. I even teased her about it tonight because, I was like, okay, I think you're going to like this drink. I said, and I'm not looking at you while you drink it because you're going to have to use your words this time.
It is delightful today. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you like it.
Tell us about your ballad.
Yeah,
Mindy.
so the ballad is called The Ballad of Tam Lin. Interesting. So anyway, it's not Tamlin, one word. It's two words, Tam.
But it's still spelled the same, right?
But it is still spelled the same. So in this ballad or legend or folklore or whatever, Tamlin waits for a maiden, and the maiden, get this, is usually named Janet or Margaret. So that was interesting. Janet.
We don't know any authors with that as their middle name that Whitney has said over and over and over again.
He's waiting for a maiden, and then one comes by and picks a rose from where he's sitting in this garden. And he asks why she's stealing from him, and she claims that the land is hers and it was given to her by her dad. And in most variants, I'm not really sure why that exchange leads to her becoming pregnant, but in most variants, she goes home and discovers that she's pregnant.
She took his flower. He didn't take hers.
Right? So she then returns to pick another rose. And what's interesting is the pregnancy never comes up again. I don't know. That was so weird. But she returns to pick another one, and he challenges her again. And they strike up a conversation, and she asks if he was ever human. And because he's Fae in this, and he tells her that he was caught and captured by the Queen of Fairies. So he was, but then he shacked up with the Queen of Fairies and became a fairy somehow that way. But he always fears that he will be given as a tithe to hell because every 7 years the fairies sacrifice one of their people. For some reason, he's paranoid that it's going to be him. So he asks Janet to save him when he is. So he's going to be riding in this parade of elven knights, and so he's going to be riding along this company, and he asks Janet to save him while he's doing that. She says she will know him by his white horse, and he tells her to pull him off the horse and catch him, and then he warns her that the fairies will try to make her drop him by turning him into a bunch of different beasts, but that he won't harm her while that's happening. Then when he's finally turned into a burning coal, which is not a beast. I'm not really sure where that came from.
Hoping this ballad had a burning coal in it.
As most ballads do.
I was waiting. I was like, God, where's the burning coal? I'm waiting.
But this is where it gets very interesting. So when he's turned into a burning coal, she's to throw him in a well, and he will reappear as a naked man.
Ooh.
And she has to hide him
in her vagina. Is that how she got pregnant?
Maybe that's what it was. So she does this. So Janet follows through, and she does all this, and she wins her night. And then
she's a better woman than me, because I'd be like, you know what?
I don't want to touch hot coal. Can you tell me when you turn into a diamond, and then I'll catch you?
And then basically, the ending is the Queen of Fairies is pissed, but acknowledges defeat. The end. What the fuck? I mean, that is the weirdest. But how many similarities in there to different things?
That had to have
been a resource.
This
there
novel.
is a fan theory that Amarantha is Tamlin's mate, and he rejects the mating bond.
I've seen that, and
I love this.
I love that.
I'm so on board with this.
For her, I wouldn't say that Amarantha accepts defeat, but she does get defeated, right? And her whole thing is she is a scorned lover that doesn't get the man that she wants, and then, she finally, quote unquote, gets him while he's a piece of shit sitting on the throne next to her under the mountain. But I'm still seeing a lot of similarities there too. And we talked about this some last time, like, the reason I don't want a POV from Tamlin's point of view is because I don't really want him to be like sitting on the throne and being like, well, I guess Amarantha's my mate, so I can't really do anything. Like, because you know that's what he talks like.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So
I think that's canon.
That's canon. Yes, Sarah J. Maas, canon. I went to like a Wizard World Comic Con once, and I was in the Doctor Who panel with Matt Smith and Karen Gillian, which was probably a highlight of my life, especially when Matt Smith did like the TARDIS, like the Doctor Who opening sounds, which I thought was really, really fun. But there was this guy next to us that legit had like a 5-foot sword under his seat, and it looked sharp. It looked like it could literally cut someone's head off.
Is that a 5-foot sword, or are you just happy to see me?
I think he was happy to see any female, but he kept, every time Matt Smith would say something, he'd just go, canon, canon. Like, Matt Smith doesn't even know what's canon, buddy. Stephen Moffat does. So just lay off a little bit. Well, Mindy, do you mind if I talk a little bit about fear of the unknown and fight or flight?
Yeah, I was definitely hoping that like the lesser fairy talk would lead you into that.
Yeah. So we have not talked much about the bogey beyond the fact that Feyre is scared of him and the vocabulary, right? Mm-hmm. In Mindy's first part. And so a part of the final chapter from this week's read is Feyre and Lucien are riding on horseback and quote unquote hunting. Her hair is on the back of her neck, and she kind of goes into this like hunting instinct of like something's around, the air's changed, something's looking at us, blah, blah, blah. Lucien, suddenly becomes very tense and tells her like, act like nothing's happening, look forward, don't say anything. You even start to notice like characteristics in the animals, right? The horses start to get stiff, their ears kind of go back on their head, which honestly, I didn't know that horses did that. I thought that was a dog thing. So maybe she just wrote it that way. I don't know. Then this voice starts playing in her head, like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And it gets so intense, and she's becoming so kind of quote unquote under the spell of this thing that tears are running down her face.
Can I just interject that if you want somebody to look at you, I suggest not telling them you're going to eat them before you tell them that.
They'd be like, hey, here's a yummy cocktail from our Nerdiest thing with chocolate and sprinkles on it. Look over here. Look over here.
Did someone say cake?
No, it'd be like, I got some cake over here. There's some Prosecco with it. You guys want a drink or what? Then I would look over there. I'd be like, wait, what? I'm not supposed to look at you, but did you say Prosecco? So she becomes so scared that like tears are going down her face. It takes several minutes before this bogey goes away, and you can, she talks about how she can visibly see Lucien like loosen up, and then, he finally looks at her again. So I started thinking a lot about fear of the unknown and fight or flight when you get into super stressful situations, like when someone says they're going to eat you. I found this really cool quote by H.P. Lovecraft, and if you don't know who he is, he's kind of like the grandfather of like horror, and has written a lot of things that you know of in the fandom. Do you guys know how to pronounce Chutulu? Cthulhu. Thank you so much. I knew that I was not saying that right, even though I've read that book. But, he's responsible for that. But a lot of his monsters you never actually see in his writing, right? And they even go into it on Supernatural, which I think is kind of cool. So he has a quote that says, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. And that's something that I really love about this writing, because what I think of in my head is always way scarier than the way someone can describe something, or even like, show something in special effects. A really good example would be M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. Did you guys ever see that movie?
I love that movie so much.
That alien looks fake as fuck.
Right. It was so much scarier when you don't see it.
Exactly.
Like, puffing from out behind that tree.
I have not seen this movie, but now I definitely want to.
You never saw Signs?
No, I know I'm weird.
My gosh.
Maybe we'll do a bonus episode where we watch it all together, and that would be
commentary.
Really, yeah, exactly.
Yes, like talk about it while we watch it.
That would be fun.
So much.
Right, but yeah, like they show it, and it's like, I'm an alien from Area 51. I look exactly like
Hey,
this.
everybody.
Hi, I'm glowing green. It's fine.
Now I'm imagining him with a cowboy hat and spurs.
Might as
We're going to illustrate that after we watch the movie together. That's going to be really, really great. When it comes to the fear of the unknown, if little information is available to predict an outcome or a decision, it makes us feel more anxious. It gives us uncertainty about the future, right? As humans, we do want to know what's going to happen next. We want to plan next. And, not to speak for you two, but I know all of us live with high anxiety. And when we get into uncomfortable situations where we can't plan to step out of our anxious zone, it makes it 10 times worse, right? But every human has a level of this. So according to healthline.com, and I did not know this is where this word came from, the psychological term for fear of the unknown is actually xenophobia. Did you all know that?
I did not know that.
In modern usage, the word has evolved to mean the fear of strangers or foreigners, as we know of it now. But its original meaning is much broader. It includes anything or anyone that's unfamiliar or unknown.
That's interesting.
Who knew? But please don't use xenophobia as that's not modern times, y'all. Don't use the word that way anymore.
Don't put it in your Instagram bio.
Please don't. I'm xenophobic. Don't say that. So there's also a phobia of supernatural. So this can include nocturnal panic attacks, psychosis, other types of phobia that can occur during the night, dissociative states of sleep, dementia, and a few rare presentations of epilepsy. And I mean, we all know that anxiety can do really weird things to your body, right? So, like I said, if your brain's always trying to predict what's going to happen next and it can't, then your mind and body literally don't know how to react, right? So that's how the idea of fight or flight comes into this, because, I mean, essentially Lucian does freeze. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't say, like, we're going to ride off as quick as possible. I'm going to, we're going to just turn around and, go back to Tamlin now, because later in the chapter we do find out that Tamlin does know how to hunt a bogey. He literally freezes and tells Feyre to freeze too. So for those of you that don't know what the fight or flight response is, it's typically called the stress response. It's triggered by a release of hormones, and that tells us to either stay and fight or run away and flee whenever we go into a super stressful situation. So during that time, your body does all of these things to essentially keep it alive, right? So your body might freeze because you think if you don't look at the bogey, he can't kill you, right? Or flight, where you're going to, you have a magical sword that's going to, like, cut the bogey's head off or something like that. And it never really goes into how Tamlin kills the bogey, does it? He just hunts it. I did notice, though, in this chapter, just a little sidebar, Feyre stays up to see if Tamlin comes back, and it's the first indicator that she might actually care about these people a little bit. I wrote that down
too.
Yeah. But we all know she sees her father, which we'll talk more about that next week. So there's a few things that can happen during the stress response, and again, anyone living with anxiety can tell you these are all things, but also I would like to say these are also symptoms of fibromyalgia, which I live with, a lot of chronic diseases, or premenopause, which my fucking doctor asked me if he thought I had a couple weeks ago. For the record, I'm 40 and fuck that guy. No, I do not have premenopause. Screw you.
I do.
Not when you were 40, you didn't. Christ.
Well, I'm 48. I mean, it's not that much later, but yes, I know.
You weren't. I'm going to sound super sexy, you guys. You weren't sweating through your clothes when you were 40. And
no,
that's my only
I am
symptom.
now, though.
Right. That's my only symptom. So do I have, like, what is it called whenever someone's on their period and you feel bad for them? Sympathy pains.
Maybe that's what it is.
Do I have sympathy sweats for you?
Maybe that's what it is.
Any men that are listening to this, it's like a pretty sweat. It's not a gross sweat. And my husband also produces and edits our podcast. Baby, it's the most, like, magnificent sweat you've ever seen. Okay, so during a stress response, a few things happen. Your heart rate and blood pressure increase, and that means that you're probably breathing more heavily, and this is so that you can move nutrients and oxygen to your major muscle groups so that when you do need to fight, you can. You have pale or flushed skin, which Whitney has a nice little olive tone. I think me and Mindy, though, it's like, oh, so are you always in a traumatic response somewhere? Because Mindy and I live looking like Snow White. Alabaster doesn't do it justice. So one thing that you always hear people say is they, like, didn't feel pain in the moment. And so your pain system essentially goes offline, and it's so you can keep fighting whatever you're trying to get away from, and so you don't feel the pain later, and you'll keep doing whatever you're supposed to do. Your pupils dilate, your memories can be affected. Anyone that tells you they've been through something traumatic definitely does not remember everything. And then your bladder can be affected. So the phrase "that was so scary I almost pissed myself" definitely comes from this fight or flight response, right?
So it's not my fault.
It's not your fault. It's a response of your body trying to continue to be alive. And so I guess when you piss yourself, it's a reminder that you're still there. I don't know.
You're still alive.
You're still, honey. Just keep fighting, honey. I'm going to pee on you so you remember everything's okay. Okay, so with it being near Halloween, I'd like to know, what's the spookiest thing that's ever happened to you? Like, it can be a fear of the unknown. It can be, a supernatural thing. But, let me know. Whit, do you want to go first? I want to know what your spookiest thing is.
Sure. I am from a small town, and I used to work for a theater show in that small town, and they used to help.
No, you're downplaying it. It was it was a movie theater. It had what?
No,
3?
not the movie theater.
Oh.
This was live theater, and they used to have performers come and stay for the summer, so they would help them find apartments around town. And one summer, and this is the only time I ever did this, I cleaned the apartments for people before they showed up. And there was this building that I had gone past a million times growing up there, but I had never been inside. And I still don't know the history of it because I refused to look it up. But I was in this apartment and I was cleaning. It was just me. And I went into this one room. I think it was either a kitchen or a bedroom. I'm not 100% sure. But I just got this overwhelming, creeped out feeling of just this is not right. This is not right. And I need to leave right now. And there was absolutely nothing to make me feel that way. There was no creepy things happening. There were no creepy sounds. There were no people. It was literally just me, and my little bucket of cleaning supplies. But it was overwhelming. You must leave right now.
Did you?
I 100% did. And I called my mom and I was like, I cannot do this. I cannot be here. And I told my boss about it and was like, what is the deal with this? Am I just a big baby? Which, yes, I am. But I got told by multiple people that building is supposed to be super haunted because but it is across the street from a really old tavern that is supposed to be super haunted that actually burned to the ground a long time ago.
When we are done, I want to know what this building's called. I'm going to research it, but I'll never tell you. I promise.
Please don't tell me.
Promise.
I also have another one too. One of my really good childhood friends, her family moved into this humongous house that was super old and needed everything updated when we were in elementary school. And it was kind of out from town. And they worked on this house to update it and renovate and all this stuff. And the house used to be, back in horse and buggy days, it was a hotel for people. And so the story is that, and this is a story that I learned. Yeah, actually, I'll tell the story last. So we would go out there a lot while the construction workers were doing all their renovations and stuff like that. And we were out there for something. I don't know what, but I stayed in the car and was waiting. And there are all these windows in this house. And it's a 2-story house and a basement. And you could see the construction workers and you could see my mom walking through the house and talking to her friend, my friend's mom. And
oh God, you've told me this story and my stomach just sank.
And there were a couple of kids that were construction worker kids, right? And they were just staring at me from the basement. And so my mom took forever, of course. And so I went into the house to look for her. And I asked about the kids that I had seen and was told there are no kids. There are no kids in this house. And I know this sounds like one of those, Cosmo magazine would print a story like this, a spooky story. But this 100% happened.
We wouldn't know because the only thing I've ever read with you out of Cosmo is Red Hot Reads. That needs to be a bonus episode.
That's a different kind of story.
10 or 15 years ago, we would have some girls over and have a few cocktails, and Whitney would read the Red Hot reads out of the back of Cosmo, but in her English teacher, like
Dramatic reading.
Dramatic reading. And one of them was like, they never actually said like member or cock or anything like that. It was like Sarah J. Maas, like velvet wrapped steel. Like, and like, so we're going to have to do that soon, I think.
Yeah.
Why are ghost kids so much worse than adult
I don't know,
ghosts?
but they really are. Well, I found out later. So, like, there are no kids here, whatever. And I was like, well, I definitely saw some. I found out later that the house used to be this hotel. And the story is that some really contagious illness went through the hotel and a lot of people passed away all at the same time. And so the story is that several kids passed away and that the nanny, basically the hotel nanny, passed away of the same whatever illness too. Oh. So, but I will say that the same friend, the same house, they were home one day and two women knocked on their front door out of the blue. And the women were like, we are nuns. And we were driving past your house and we felt like evil spirits and we would like to bless your house. Would that be okay with you? And my friend's parents are like not into that kind of, they don't believe in any of that. And they're like, whatever, if it'll make you feel better, like that's fine. And so they did whatever, I don't know, like they blessed each room and they had, smudge sticks, whatever. And after that, I felt a lot more comfortable at the house.
Interesting.
But I didn't know that had happened until like a lot later. I just suddenly felt more comfortable.
So I guess you wouldn't know if they ever had any experiences because they would think they would brush it off as something else.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. No, they've always said that they never had anything weird happen, but they would, like you said, they would just.
Or maybe they're not as open, like mentally. You know what I mean? Some people are more open to those types of experiences. Not even like your own like mental hindrances. I mean, like on a basic level, some people are more open to seeing things than others. So.
When I go visit my parents, I still have to drive past that house, and I'm like, every time I drive by.
Ever tell me what house it is. I swear.
Oh, no,
I will tell you all about the building I'm going to look into if you make me drive past that house. What about
those are my two spooky things.
What about you, Mindy?
Mine, I racked my brain. I could not come up with anything like spooky that like creeped me out necessarily, other than like I don't like haunted houses, but I think that's just an anxiety thing.
I think it is too, but I mean, I really want you to go to one with me this year, but we're almost out of time.
We'll see. But I do have a very creepy story, and some of the backstory is, first of all, when I was younger, I went to, it wasn't called daycare, it was called nursery school. And so this was, basically preschool. One of the main teachers there, her name was Mrs. Moody, and I will remember her till the day I die. Was older lady with like, the gray, curly hair that always got done like a football helmet, like when you go to the, and then she had the eyeglasses on that had the chains so that you could like hang them around your neck. I just remember her vividly, and she always wore vests, like not like fancy vests, but just like weird, like quilted vests or whatever.
Sometimes a t-shirt's not enough.
True. But I can picture her in my head vividly. But she was not very nice. At least in my memory, she was not very nice.
Was she kind of moody?
She was very moody.
Sorry.
But she, I distinctly remember I got my mouth washed out with soap one time. Ew. Yeah, and not because I said anything bad. It was because I wouldn't share my blocks. And also, she made me eat red beans and rice, and I will never forget that because I did not want to eat red beans and rice. And who serves a 5-year-old red beans and rice? I don't know. At any rate, I did not like her. She was not my favorite.
Whitney and I are laughing so hard right now.
I mean, right though? Like, who feeds kids that? She was weird.
Beans by themselves and rice by themselves are fine, but don't you dare put those things together.
Well, it just seems like such a weird thing. Like, why not peanut butter and jelly? Why not macaroni and cheese?
I just didn't want to eat that.
Did not. She's not my grandma.
Grandma never made me eat those things.
No, she made me eat beef stew. Right? So that's the backstory. So fast forward, and I'm in college, and I come home I was home for a weekend, and I'm reading in the newspaper about this weird, creepy story. And it's happened there's this little area called St. Matthews, which is where I grew up and where the nursery school was. And on this street, in this quiet little, East End town, which here the East End's like the hoity-toity section.
It's where the bougie bogey would live.
Yes. And there's this story about the neighbors saw like some weird like legs and arms sticking up out of the trash can, and they were asking the young man who lived there, and he was like, oh, it's just mannequins. It's, nothing, whatever. And like, it's literally out on his front porch.
It's never just mannequins.
No, it's just Miss Moody. It was her. No! Yes. So her son, who he really was mentally ill. He was older, like, he was not a teenager. He was in his like 20s or 30s. He had to be even older than that, actually, because she was really old when I was in nursery school. But I guess she got a little too moody, and he got upset and basically like hacked her up and put her in the.
And just left her legs
and just
out?
left her out for the trash man to pick up.
That is so sad.
Yeah, very, very creepy, weird.
Oh, Miss Moody.
I know.
I mean,
she didn't deserve that for the red beans and rice.
I don't know. She did not. Oh,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, my stuff's not as interesting. I've never seen a dead person's leg sticking out of a trash.
Well, I mean, I didn't see it. It was just reported
someone
on.
did.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
The neighbors did.
I thought you were going to say Mrs. Moody was never there. And I was like, okay, that is a really good supernatural story.
She's been dead for 15 years.
Did you not hear the synopsis? Fringe joke, y'all, if you don't know what we're talking about. Okay, so I have two, and one feels very insignificant, but when you're living by yourself, nothing feels insignificant, right? This was in college, and I had an apartment by myself because, quite frankly, I can't stand people. I don't want to live with them. I can talk to people, and I love being around them, but I am so glad I never have to have another roommate my entire life because I'm married. And so I was in my room reading because I've done that since a very young age. And I was laying there and I had one of those lamps. I mean, everyone has these in college. It's like the floor lamp that's got like the half sphere at the top, right? And like the light bulb sticks out of the top. And it like when you turn it on, it's got like the little thing on the side that you click twice, right? Mm-hmm. The little turning knob. That's the official term of this, the turning knob. I'm laying in the dark house with the lamp on in my bedroom and I hear click, click. And look over, and the fucking lamp was on.
No, I would die.
And those were not lamps that, like, you had to click it twice to get it to come on. It's not like I didn't turn it off all the way or anything like that. Right. And I heard it. Click, click. And it's just on. You guys, by myself, I had to get out of that bed because I thought for sure someone was in my house.
Did you pee your pants?
I nearly pissed myself. I was so scared. I'm not going to lie.
I would have, too.
I would probably, like, run out the door.
Where was I going to go? I just said I don't like people. It's not like people were inviting me to sleep on their couch. Like, I'm kind of a bitch now. Can you imagine back then whenever all I was eating was peanut butter sandwiches? I was hungry and rude. So the other one, like, nothing super negative has happened, but the house that we live in now, we've lived in for almost 18 months. And there has been several times in this house, and Whitney's she's looking at me like, don't say it, don't say it. It's not anything bad.
Don't tell me any of this.
So I own a design company. I've talked about that before. And my studio is upstairs at the end of the hallway. And my son and I really like to mess with each other. He's like everything you would think of in terms of an 11-year-old boy. Like, we love to jump scare each other. And I can tell you guys at this, I am so good at this game, but I am playing with an 11-year-old, so maybe I shouldn't brag. But anyway, we like to sneak up on each other and do jump scares. I mean, at least once a week. I think, you know how like the air changes when someone walks up behind you? Yep. I feel that, and I will turn around and look, and nothing's there. And all the time, I'll just go, not right now. I'm working. Please stop. Like, because like it's kind of like an acknowledgement thing where you're like, everything's okay. I am working. So the other thing is I used to get up and work in the studio really, really early, like at 5 a.m. before everyone would get up. and I kept hearing someone walking around upstairs on more than one occasion, and I'll go up there and no one's up, right? And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe they're like going to the bathroom or whatever. So I told my husband really,
In this house or
yeah,
here?
yeah. My husband really does not believe in this kind of stuff at all. And, you know, I was telling him about it, and he kind of giggles, and he's like, probably someone was going to the bathroom or something. So one day he gets up early. And I told him, like, I came downstairs later that morning, and I was like, gosh, I slept till good. I slept till like 10 or whatever. And he's like, well, I heard you up and walking around earlier when you went to the bathroom. And I was like, babe, I never got up. Not one single time. The kids weren't here. I was like, I was not up out of that bed. And he just like didn't say anything after that. But I mean, like, here's the thing. If there is something in the house, it's very friendly. Nothing negative's ever happened.
We're going to have to relocate this podcast.
You're going to have to talk to our producer and editor about that. He is not going to let you take this expensive equipment out of my house. But yeah, so now Whitney won't look me in the eye.
I can't handle it.
It's not children, Whitney. God, that's terrifying. That's way scarier than what I just told you.
That's debatable. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to talk about with this?
Something that I totally forgot to bring up when you were talking about foreshadowing. And it goes back to Alice, who we've never actually really talked about.
I know, poor Alice.
I know. She's just, But something that really stood out to me is, and this was in the last chapters we read, when Feyre first meets Alice, she's already giving her a warning that we see later on. And she says, if you're wise, you'll keep your wits about you and your ears open. Those are her exact words. And later on, we know that's exactly what she tells her before she goes under the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it too, like in the beginning of the chapters we just read this week, like the very beginning of, I think it's chapter 8, talks about how she keeps hearing someone walking behind her on the gravel. 2 sets of feet. She starts hearing giggling, and then all of a sudden, kind of Alice saves the day and yells for her to come to lunch, right?
Yeah.
And it's, that goes into the bogey too. Like, you can hear it, and you better be able to do what we tell you to do so that you don't look at the bogey.
What I was going to say about Alice and Feyre hearing those footsteps behind her is that Feyre expects everything in Prythian to be awful and evil and mean. And so even just 2 little kids that are being silly little kids and sweet and want to play, she interprets completely differently.
I'm so sorry. Please remind me. I know you said this last week, but isn't Tamlin glamoring the staff away?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm not sure it ever comes back to what that was, does it?
No, but I think we're supposed to think that they're out, because Alice tells Feyre later, or maybe she's told her in this section, but she says, I have 2 nephews that live here at the Spring Court.
Right.
So I think we're supposed to infer that in this instance, it's the 2.
That's what I've always thought
It goes back to that fear of unknown, though, because I got goosebumps while I was reading that. And I mean, I've read this book several times, right?
Yeah.
And even wrote in the margins, who the hell is this?
I think it's Alice's nephew. I think we're supposed to think it's Alice's nephews.
Okay.
But no, Tamlin is glamoring everybody.
Right.
And, that's going to come up in next week's, or maybe not next week's section, but later, Feyre realizes, or I guess Tamlin tells her, I've been glamoring everybody, and there's been a lot of people around that you have not been seeing.
I hope you didn't pick your nose or pick your butt.
Right? She realizes, oh, I thought I was alone for all of this and this and this, and everybody saw me do stupid stuff. And she's really embarrassed.
You gotta wonder. I would be like, oh God, who's seen me naked?
I don't care about people seeing me naked. I'd be more mortified if they saw me pick my nose.
Which is interesting.
Did I pick my nose?
No, I'm just thinking about Tamlin glamoring everybody. That's an interesting parallel to Rhysand, who was glamoring an entire city from other people.
From everybody.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're kind of doing the same thing. It's like what we talked about last week. They're kind of doing the same thing, but there are some details that are different that change the entire tone of what's happening.
Why is Tamlin glamoring everybody?
I think he doesn't want to freak her out.
I do feel like it was something that he did
Positively?
Yeah, he's trying to protect her from...
Well, because later when he stops the glamour, Alice looks different. Yeah. And she realizes that he wasn't glamoring Alice into being invisible, but he was glamoring the way that she looks to make her seem more human.
Yeah, because
That's
if
right.
she's lesser face, she wouldn't have human.
Right.
She wouldn't look human.
I'm pretty sure that his motivation is to not freak Feyre out even more than she's already freaking.
I am
you
just
know?
learning so much from you too.
Side note, I always fan cast in my head. And when I originally, like before, like I'd always pictured her like Angela Lansbury, like Mrs. Potts or whatever.
Me too.
So, but then I'm reading it and, she's rotund, brown haired woman. And then I'm like, okay, well, now who would I cast? It's not Angela Lansbury. Now I'm
she's
thinking Melissa McCarthy.
No, she's Mrs. Fitz off of Outlander.
Oh, yeah.
That's who I picture.
Oh,
Yeah, I like
that
that
a
better.
lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the same similarities.
Yeah.
Just,
Yes.
she's not Ginger.
Yeah, I love that. That does fit really well.
Yeah.
So that wraps up the discussion for this week, but let's go through our nerdiest thing of the week. And I can go ahead and start if that's okay.
Please do.
So my nerdiest thing this week is listening on repeat to a song called Chapter 54 by Kelsey Woods, who is a composer. She has three, I think, at least three that I know of that are instrumental pieces that she has written to go along with different scenes in the court books.
Oh, cool.
So she wrote the music Under the Mountain, and she wrote a song for the scene where Feyre finds out or realizes that Rhysand is the one that sent her the music Under the Mountain. And then she has one called Chapter 54. And the reason that I like it so much is because when I was an English teacher, my dream was to be able, and I never did it, but my dream was to be able to play a song, like an instrumental song, and have my students free write to it and pick out the emotion that the song is trying to evoke in you and write a story with that emotion in mind. And these songs is basically the reverse of that. Okay. She's taking the story and creating music to portray the emotions from the story.
That's cool.
If that makes sense.
Do you know what Chapter 54 is?
Chapter 54 is where Rhysand tells Feyre his whole story.
Okay.
I know we're mates. This is the history.
This is in book 2.
Yes.
Okay.
In Mist and Fury. Yes.
Okay.
I need to look that up.
It's really cool.
I'll go next. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a total nerd when it comes to ice hockey. And I think me and my husband are literally the only people I know in this city that follow hockey at all. And we're huge St. Louis Blues fans. Hockey season hasn't started yet, and it's been a couple of months, and I'm having withdrawals. And so as a huge hockey nerd, I'm craving watching some hockey. So I found out that this weekend their prospects. So every year in the draft, they have so many new players they draft. So these are all their prospects. Anyone under 24 can play in this prospect tournament.
That's a little ageist.
Well, I watched the prospect tournament like a huge nerd because I really, really wanted to watch some hockey, and it's not good hockey. No offense, they're great guys, but they're it's not top tier level NHL hockey. It's not the same.
All these guys have their teeth. None of them are punching each other. No fun.
So yeah, that's what I did this weekend. I watched really, really low tier ice hockey.
But you enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it, actually.
It reminds me of Fever Pitch. Have you ever seen that with Drew Barrymore and Jimmy Fallon? It's actually a really cute movie, but he's a huge, what fan is he? Cubs?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's Cubs, and so much so that he goes down to the spring training and stuff, and is the crazy person on television. We need to watch that. It's really cute. My first one is our cocktail for this week. In the spirit of Halloween, I did make a cocktail called the Crypt Keeper. It has cranberry juice cocktail, blue curacao. Am I pronouncing that right, Whitney?
I think so.
Okay, blue curacao liqueur, vodka, and then you rim the glass with frosting in sprinkles, which sprinkles almost killed Mindy tonight because one got lodged in her throat. Really, really, really delicious. Outside of that, so there have been some rumor swirling around about Sam Heughan from Outlander being attached to A Court of Thorns and Roses. And with Sam being our favorite real life Ginger, I started thinking about him as our favorite fictional Ginger, which would be Lucien, with hopes that he's actually playing Tamlin, even though I want him to be on the show more than he would be if that was the case. And so I started drawing Lucien this week in Procreate and got super duper motivated. I'm almost done, but you know, you're never actually really done. I need to do the background. And then on top of that, there's this illustrator I really love that is doing this like draw it in your own way challenge. And so she had posted a picture of her Manon Blackbeak from, I always want to say Buckbeak from Harry Potter, Manon Blackbeak from Throne of Glass. She has this really cool painting style that I love that you really don't see anywhere else right now. But so I started doing that too. So hopefully at some point I'll post them both. But Lucien does not have a shirt on and he looks all man.
Hot.
So many times he gets drawn like he's like this scrawny little thing, which we know he's not. And so I'm kind of into it. It's nice.
No, that's awesome. I'm excited to see it when you're finished. All right, well, that's it for this week. And next week, guys, we are reading chapters 11 and 12.
For exclusive content and to keep up with all things nerdy, follow us on Instagram at Our Nerdiest Thing. We post book reviews, what to read next, and our cocktail recipes. Have something nerdy that you'd like to share? Email us at ournerdiestthing@gmail.com. This podcast is edited and produced by The Story Guides. Thanks for listening.